Hello BookTube. So I went as far as to take my tripod to my parents' place with me, taking up precious book space in my suitcase, and then somehow I never filmed. And I hauled it with me. Anyway, there I'm back. I had at least intended to do a book haul while I was visiting my parents, but I didn't. So here we are now with a giant stack of books. I managed to fit, I think, somewhere around 20 books into my luggage. And even with those books, my suitcase only weighed 35 pounds when they weighed at Union Station. Now, this is Canadian weather, so winter suddenly disappeared, and now it's 27 degrees, and I'm sweating, so there's that. I'm still having tea though. Even when it's like 30 degrees, I still make my cup of tea. So I've got two stacks here. I've got one that's new books, and I've got one that is books I've owned, but they haven't been here with me in Ottawa. I did stuff some of my classics into my suitcase because I either reread them when I was home, or I'd like to reread them soon. And I think I'm going to start with the new old books, if that makes sense. So I brought my copy of Surfacing by Margaret Atwood with me here. This is one of Margaret Atwood's earliest works, 1972, one of her early novels that most people haven't read. It's so short it's almost a novella, I think. And oddly enough, this is the only Margaret Atwood novel that I've read. I also brought my copy of Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen out to Ottawa with me, because I'd like to reread that one. And I brought my copy of Persuasion as well, because this is the first book that I reread when I was visiting my parents. I also ended up rereading Charlotte Bronte's Villette, which I hadn't read since I was 14, and I had this copy kicking around for years. It was actually a gift from my grandmother for Christmas one year. She did this thing where she always covered up the price with a fun sticker. Not that it really mattered, but that's how I knew that this is where I got that copy from. And after receiving it, I never did reread it because I had originally read this in a library copy. And I absolutely loved this on reread, even better than the first time through, I think. And it's something I might do a formal review video on. I say that all the time and then I don't, but this is one that I think I'm definitely going to talk a bit about. And along that line, I brought my battered hardcover copy of Jane Eyre with me as well, and my copy of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. And kind of at the last minute, I ended up throwing in my copy of Crime and Punishment because I thought that's something I would like to reread in the near future as well. Now on to the new books, the ones you probably care more about. First of all, I've got one that I'm reading now. I'm not too impressed with it. It's probably going to be a 2-star read just because stylistically it's not a very good biography, and that is Juna, the Formidable Miss Barnes by Andrew Field. It's set up in a very strange way. It's not very engaging. I'm like 2/3 of the way through and we're finally getting her backstory about her parents, about her upbringing, which is something you typically find near the beginning of a biography, and that's where I like to find it. As well, the author gets sidetracked a bit with talking about Paris in the 1920s, which is an interesting topic, but that's not what the book claims to be about. I also picked up Howard's End by E.M. Forster, which I did read last week, my first E.M. Forster novel, and it came from Old Goat Books in Uptown Waterloo, 99 King Street North, Uptown Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. www.oldgoatbooks.com if you'd like to check out this shop for yourself. Howard's End is, of course, a classic. I'd never read it. It wasn't anything fantastic. I found myself a little bored in the middle, but overall I did enjoy it, and I think it's something I would reread again to see if I get more out of it the second time through. And then because I picked that up, a couple days later I ended up picking up Maurice, also by E.M. Forster. Another classic work I'd like to read in the near future. I especially love this Penguin edition too. It's got a nice cover, nice coloring, very pretty brown. Then I've got something I actually got before I went on my vacation. This arrived in the mail a couple days beforehand, and that is The Girls in 3B by Valerie Taylor in a Femme Fatale edition. I read this partly before I went, and I finished it on the train to my parents' place as well. A very, very interesting book. Not my favorite in the Femme Fatale series, but probably one of my favorite Valerie Taylor novels to date, although I did find myself saying, where is the lesbian relationship in this one? Because it plays a very, very small role for a novel that is marketed largely as a lesbian pulp novel. But the other characters and their relationships and interactions in New York were quite interesting, so that aside, it was a very good novel. I ended up picking up Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. This is an Anne Bronte novel that I've never read. When I read a lot of the Bronte sisters novels when I was 14, 15, 16, somehow this is one that I never picked up. At least I don't think I did. It's possible that I did and I don't remember, but in my recollection at this point, I don't think I read this particular novel. I picked up Fanny Hill as well. This one was relatively cheap secondhand because it's a little bit damaged. So this is Fanny Hill, or Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure by John Cleland, with an introduction by Gary Goder. This is one that I recognize the title of, but I had no idea really what it was about. So I'll just read the back for you. Fanny Hill, shrouded in controversy for most of its more than 250-year life and banned from publication in the United States until 1966, was once considered immoral and without literary merit, even earning its author a jail sentence for obscenity. The tale of a naive young prostitute in bawdy 18th century London who slowly rises to respectability. The novel and its popularity endured many bannings and critics, and today Fanny Hill is considered an important piece of political parody and sexual philosophy, on par with French libertine novels. This uncensored version is set from the 1749 edition, and includes commentary by Charles Rembar, the lawyer who defended the novel in the 1966 U.S. Supreme Court case, and newly commissioned notes. So this sounds quite interesting, and of course the Modern Library Classics editions, that always draws me to a book. picked up an Evelyn Waugh novel, Brideshead Revisited. I always find myself tripping on the name, so I do apologize for that. It's not because I haven't looked it up. It seems like no matter how many times I look it up, when I try to pronounce it myself, I always stumble. I actually owned a copy of this several years ago, but never got around to reading it. This is an early 20th century classic, definitely one that I think several movies or miniseries have been made about, something I want to get to, and it's penguin. I seem to have a penguin theme in this haul. And another one that I read last week and picked up as well is The Vagabond by Colette. I enjoyed this one as well. It's about an actress who is kind of a failed writer. She's reaching middle age, and yet she feels she's destined to be alone, and she almost prefers it that way. She avoids men and rejects lovers, but she doesn't seem too satisfied with her career or her path. So it's a very, very interesting novel, just because of who she is as a character and how she interacts with other people, with other characters, and her perspective on relationships. I may do a formal review of this one as well, perhaps when I give it a reread. Oh, this got on the wrong pile. This is one that I owned before, but I brought with me. This is Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. thin. I thought I could stuff it in my suitcase at the last minute. Then I picked up Gustave Flaubert's Sentimental Education. I'd heard some good things about this one earlier in the year. I'd been looking for a nice secondhand copy, came across it finally. I don't actually know much about this one, and the back isn't telling me much, but I listened to a lecture on French literature on Audible earlier this year, and the author of that lecture talked about this novel, which I found quite interesting at the time, and I wish I could recall exactly what drew me towards it, but I saw this title and I went for it. If you know anything about this one, please let me know in the comments, whether it's good, bad, whether I should chuck it out the window or read it. Then I got some Trollope. I've been meaning to read some Trollope, and I found this beautiful Penguin English Library edition of The Small House at Allington. In this lively, intimate portrayal of country society, Trollope introduces two of his most endearing heroines, the spirited, independent-minded Lily and Belledale, who live with their widowed mother. As one sister is betrayed by the ambitious man she adores, while the other must confront her reluctance to let any man near her heart, Trollope weaves together an intricate story of thwarted love, self-deception, and social climbing, written when he was at the height of his popularity. So that sounds good. But I'm more excited about Barchester Towers, which I have at the bottom of this stack here. I'm not going to try to pull it up now. But in addition to that Trollope, I hit the jackpot with some more Evelyn Waugh Penguins. These pretty editions. I picked up Scoop, and I'm going to kind of rush through this because I'm running out of camera space and I don't want to have to do this in two parts. Vile Bodies, quite a pretty cover as well, and Put Out More Flags. I haven't really read this author, but I've been meaning to get to them for quite a long time, so I really am looking forward to those. I picked up Ex Libris, Confessions of a Common Reader by Anne Faidman. Read this as well, really enjoyed it. Reflections on reading, a collection of essays, essentially. Very good. I got a lot of comments and feedback when I posted a picture of that book on Instagram. Turns out that one's well liked. As is another book that I posted and read last week, The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. I'm sure you can find lots about this on BookTube. It seems that everyone had read it but me up until last week. Greatly enjoyed this one. May talk about it in a video of its own. I'm committing myself to all these videos and I doubt I'm actually going to do them, so don't hold me to it. And here's the copy of Barchester Towers, also in the Penguin English Library edition that I had mentioned. I've actually seen a mini-series of this done by the BBC, I believe, but I've never actually read the book, so it's probably about time. I seem to recall that series having Alan Rickman in it. He's one of my favorites. Decline and Fall in a Penguin 20th Century Classic edition. Bit of a theme here, lots of penguins. And then I bought a couple of books tonight when I was at Black Squirrel Books on Bank Street here in Ottawa. These were $1 each. I got Colette's Earthly Paradise in a nice orange penguin edition, and Colette's Gigi and the Cat. Gigi, I think, is the novella that was made into a movie that I've seen several times. I forget who was in it, but I believe it was made in the 60s, and if this is indeed that same story, I think I'm really going to enjoy reading it because I loved that movie. So that is essentially my haul. A little bit rushed, but I had a lot to get through, and you probably don't want to sit and listen to me talk more than 14 and a half minutes.